Today I'll be talking about age-varying trends in co-use of marijuana and heavy episodic drinking or binge drinking, and the implications for non-medical prescription drug use. I also want to acknowledge my co-authors, many of whom were on the first one. And so this includes Lauren Masters and Stephanie Lanza, and also Stephanie and my shared postdoc, Hannah Allen, who is currently the team captain for the SPR Cup in the bays of our lives. It's next door. So good vibes going to Hannah. So first, I want to talk about specifically some historical changes in substance use in the U.S. Historically, we're seeing that binge drinking or heavy episodic drinking rates are generally remaining high. Even some reports actually are even suggesting that they are slightly declining across time as well. And at the same time, there are recent increases in marijuana use. I know, for example, Monitoring the Future is suggesting that that daily use of marijuana is at an all-time high among young adults in the U.S. than ever recorded in Monitoring the Future. So we're seeing binge drinking generally remaining high, marijuana use rates, at least in some age groups, increasing. But what's very interesting is that when you look at some of this recently published alcohol-related emergency department data, you see that emergency department visits increased 62% related to alcohol. So it doesn't quite make sense, right? If binge drinking is remaining high, rates of binge drinking is remaining high, or even potentially declining across historical time, why necessarily would these rates be increasing in terms of emergency department visits for alcohol? And so in this paper by Aaron White from NIAAA, he further parsed into this and saw that 1 in 6 of these emergency department visits involve co-use of alcohol with other substances. And 2 of the most common ones that Megan Patrick wrote about in a follow-up commentary were specifically focusing on alcohol and non-medical prescription drug use, of course opioids, and also alcohol and marijuana. And so essentially it may not just be due to alcohol, it may also be due to just the broader context of substance use and potential risks that this may have that may bring them to the emergency department. And so we know generally that individuals who co-use alcohol and marijuana are at increased risk for a host of negative consequences. And just to list a few, because the research is so active, there's so many ongoing papers and grants coming out, we see increased risk for injury and for violence, driving under the influence, becoming more intoxicated than planned. Also psychopathology concerns, including symptoms of anxiety and depression, and also social consequences, such as getting in fights with others. And so generally we know that individuals who use 2 substances at the same time are generally at risk for a lot of consequences relative to individuals who just use 1 substance. But we don't know much about their potential risk for prescription drug misuse. And there may be some potential linkage here that we could explore. So specifically, we know that alcohol is associated with prescription drug misuse. So individuals who use more heavily, use more often, are more likely to report prescription drug misuse. And we know the same about marijuana. We know that generally individuals who are using marijuana more often are at greater risk for using prescription pain relievers, sedatives, and tranquilizers. And it may be that individuals who are co-using or who use both alcohol and marijuana may actually be at even greater risk for using prescription drug misuse. And so one particular reason is that the most common reason that we know for prescription drug misuse is to relieve physical pain. And there are some documented perceived or actual analgesic effects of alcohol and marijuana use. And we also know that alcohol and marijuana can dysregulate pain systems and increase risk for someone experiencing pain. And there may be some potential increased tolerance as well. Some individuals may be using alcohol and marijuana, and then they are developing such a tolerance for that, but they still have the pain, and so they may turn to substances that may help alleviate that pain. And this is a very important topic, given that the co-use of alcohol and opioids specifically can dramatically increase the risk of opioid overdose and morbidity and mortality. I know that Katie Wickowitz recently came out with a paper examining this, showing that individuals who, obviously opioid misuse is strongly related to morbidity and mortality, but also using alcohol incredibly increases that risk. And so co-using these substances is very hazardous. There are also a couple other gaps in our knowledge looking at this sort of co-use of alcohol and marijuana and prescription drug misuse linkage. Specifically, we don't know necessarily what ages at which these associations may be strongest. We know, of course, from all of the Modern the Future and NISDA and SAMHSA, all of this, that the rates of each of these substances generally peak in young adulthood. We know that young adulthood is a high-risk period for heavy, frequent use. But given that prescription drug misuse is also associated with pain, it may be that these associations are strongest in middle or older adulthood, given that this is when pain is most likely. And so identifying these ages might be critical for informing prevention efforts to best identify ages at which individuals are most at risk for using prescription drugs if they are a co-user of alcohol and marijuana. Of course, we also want to consider the role of gender. We know that co-use of alcohol and marijuana is more prevalent among men, so men are more likely to be co-users. But we also know that women engage in prescription drug misuse more frequently. And so there may be some mixed findings here, and understanding the associations and not just prevalence is important for us to consider for prevention efforts. So for this study, I also used weighted time varying effect modeling, so TVEMs, to examine these age varying associations. And we were really interested in looking at this sort of higher risk group, so individuals who are using not just alcohol, but engaging in binge drinking and using marijuana, and comparing these to individuals who are only using marijuana or only binge drinking, so among this higher risk group. And so specifically are interested in comparing co-users to single substance users and identifying associations with prescription drug misuse across ages 18 to 60 and determining ages at which the associations were strongest. We also wanted to understand if there is an association, is this completely due to pain severity? Is it only related to the fact that they may be using all of these three substances to help mitigate pain? And so we also controlled in a separate analysis pain severity as well. And lastly, we also tested for differences by gender to see if there are differences in the association between co-use and prescription drug misuse for men and for women. So I also used data from PATH. I used the Wave 1 data as the baseline data, and this originally included 45,971 US adults and youth, but I've narrowed that to the analytic sample of about 8,000 people between 18 and 60. So to be a part of that analytic sample, they had to report past month binge drinking and or past year marijuana use. The way that PATH was assessed was by asking about how do you drink alcohol, and if they recently reported it, then they asked follow-up questions about how many drinks they had during a typical occasion. And so using this information, we were able to identify whether someone is a binge drinker during a typical occasion. So specifically, heavy episodic drinking or binge drinking was identified by the typical number of drinks consumed each day during the past 30 days. If a woman reported 4 or more drinks during a typical occasion, then this was categorized as binge drinking, and similarly 5 or more for men. But I do want to point out that this is a higher risk sample. This is not just did you binge drink. This is on a typical occasion, did you binge drink? So before I show you findings, just take into account the fact that this is a higher risk sample. In terms of marijuana use, this was any use in the past year, and this includes all types of cannabis. And we use this information to identify co-users. So co-users were individuals who engaged in past 30-day binge drinking, or HED, and past year marijuana use. Also, prescription drug misuse, similar to Stephanie, was any use in the past year across painkillers, sedatives, or tranquilizers, and using them non-medically. And we also used the pain symptom severity scale that Stephanie used as well, looking at past 7-day pain. We also controlled for race, ethnicity, and household income as time invariant covariates in all of our analyses. So first, I'll just show you some prevalence rates. So again, please remember that this analytic sample is a higher risk group. So when you look at marijuana only, this is not people who do not drink. It's people who do not binge drink during a typical occasion. But these are TVEMs showing the prevalence rates across ages 18 to 60. And the one I want to highlight specifically is that red line there, which is the co-users, individuals who engage in past year marijuana use and past 30-day HED or binge drinking. And so you can see that, that at age 18, approximately 30% of our analytic sample were co-users, and this generally declined across age and sort of held steady around age 33 or so. You can see that green line there is the binge-only users, so individuals who binge drink on a regular occasion but do not engage in past-year marijuana use. And you can see that from approximately ages 18 to about 25, so that young adult period, individuals are actually more likely to be co-users than just binge drinkers. So this is really a vulnerable period in terms of looking at just prevalence rates. This is also past-year prescription drug misuse across age. Again, this is just prevalence rates. You can see there's kind of a U-shaped curve here, where you can see that it generally increases across age and kind of plateaus around age mid-30s and then declines steadily across age. Again, this is our analytic sample. This is not the full population of the U.S. So getting to the good stuff, so this is comparing co-users, individuals who engage in binge drinking and marijuana use versus just either marijuana or just binge drinking, and predicting past year prescription drug misuse. And so ages or points at which that those dotted lines do not include one, or that solid line on the bottom, I wish I had a pointer, indicate significance across each of those ages. And so you can see that from ages 18 to approximately the mid to late 40s, individuals who are co-users are at higher risk for prescription drug misuse across each of those ages. And these odds ratios go up to about 2.5 in the mid 30s. You also do see that there's an uptick there around age 57 to 60, where that association becomes significant again. But these dashed lines are confidence intervals, and you can see that they're quite wide at these ages, suggesting that there's fewer individuals in our analytic sample at those ages. So we kind of want to interpret those results with caution. So this is the exact same graph, but we're controlling for pain. And so just kind of going back and forth between these two, you can really see that these associations are not becoming attenuated or weakened with controlling for pain. So these associations are holding even after you account for their recent pain severity. Then lastly, looking at co-use and prescription drug misuse by gender, the yellow line here is males and the green line is females. You can see that there's, of course, these data are cross-sectional, so we can't look at this necessarily developmentally, but it's important to point out that there's a different sort of course here for males and for females. So for males, they sort of start off low and then they increase until about the ages mid-30s, and then declining across age. Again, you see this huge uptick in late 50s, early 60s, but again, it might be related to a smaller sample at that age. Females, on the other hand, generally actually start at their highest peak in young adulthood around age 23, 24, and then generally decline across age. So you can see there's actually some differences here in terms of the course, but you can also see there's differences in terms of differences at the mid-30s. So in the mid-30s, males who co-use alcohol and marijuana are at greater risk for prescription drug misuse than females during these ages. So this is really the vulnerable time window for men. So to sum up these findings, we found that, there are about 2.5 greater odds of past year prescription drug misuse for co-users of binge drinker and marijuana users than single substance users between ages 30 to 35 approximately, and 57 to 60, although again, we're interpreting those with caution. And so co-users of alcohol and marijuana may be an important subgroup to target for prescription drug misuse prevention. It's not just individuals using prescription drugs, but it's also taking into account the larger context of their substance use and finding that these individuals are actually at even greater risk of using even more drugs. We did find that their associations were only slightly weakened after controlling for pain. And so therefore it's important to take into account other potential underlying mechanisms beyond pain. Clearly it's not just related to pain. There must be other reasons for this strong association. And so one thing to consider is sort of the developmental context. Again, these are cross-sectional data, but if we look at the prevalence rates, we saw that that co-use of binge drinking and marijuana was far less prevalent by age 30. And so really during young adulthood is really where these rates are prevalent, consistent with all of the literature ever. And but when you look at these associations, the association is really strong in the mid to late 30s. And so understanding this and understanding what sort of other motivations may be related in this age group may be important to consider. There may be other motivations such as like social factors to consider, environmental context, and potentially emotional pain as well beyond physical pain. And so we really need to understand these age-specific motivations for co-use of alcohol, marijuana, and prescription drug misuse, and the potential for substitution effects as well. I do want to point out a couple limitations. One is, of course, these are self-reported substance use data, and so this might be related to social desirability and underreporting potentially. And of course, this is cross-sectional data. We also don't know, and Stephanie had a great point about this, about how simultaneous substance use is really where the risk is at. When you compare individuals who just use one substance and just use two substances, you have this single substance use versus concurrent substance use. And concurrent users or co-users are more likely. But when you look among co-users, individuals who are using these substances so that the effects are overlapping are at much greater risk than individuals who use both substances but not at the same time. And so we don't know here if they're using them at the same time, if they're using them as, at the same time so the effects are overlapping, or if they're using one on one day and one on another day. It's not clear, but generally individuals who do use both tend to use them at the same time. And so looking at this a lot more is an important goal of mine, and I know a lot of individuals here. And the last piece I want to mention is that given the survey questions, we really focused on this higher risk group. And at first I saw this as a limitation of the sample, but then once I really thought about it, it's individuals who are at this higher risk sample are even more likely of prescription drug misuse. So even among a high risk sample, prescription drug misuse is still more common among co-users of binge drinking and marijuana use. And so overall, just some take-home points. Co-users significantly more likely to report prescription drug misuse than single substance users. Associations are strongest in the mid-30s, even after controlling for pain severity. So we should really be identifying other mechanisms that may be explaining some of these effects and how they may evolve with age. So I want to say thank you so much to Linden for NIAAA for the support, and of course the support of my co-authors as well. And I'm happy to take a couple of questions specifically related to my presentation before we turn over to Magda. So co-use was coded as whether they engaged in binge drinking during a typical occasion in the past 30 days. That's what PATH had available for that. And then marijuana use was past year. Prescription drug misuse was past year. So unfortunately, they are on a bit of a different time scale. As a supplementary analysis, I did look at just any alcohol use and any marijuana use, and we see generally the exact same patterns, except that the odds ratios are higher. So when we limit it to this higher risk group, then the associations are lower.